Welcome back to Creators of Color. This is episode 3. I'm Avi Gandhi, your host and the creator of Creators of Color. Today we're talking to Cece Xie. She is a TikToker, podcaster, soon-to-be author. She is Yale educated, Harvard law, big law attorney turned content creator. So really excited to dig in with her. All right, Cece, welcome to Creators of Color. Thanks for being on.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I was very excited to hear from you.
So Cece and I have known each other for like a very long time. One of the best educated people I know. You beat out my brother and ended up at Yale with me. You were a freshman while I was a senior. And then afterwards, you went to Harvard Law, got a law degree, and then went into big law, spent time in big law, and then threw it all away to become a creator. Did I get that summary right?
Yeah, no, that's pretty accurate, much like my parents' chagrin. But I do like to say that in general, there's no such thing as like a wasted endeavor. So I do use a lot of my like law skills in what I currently do. And I think it's like actually helped. So, those 3 years and 3 years of education and then years of practice aren't for naught.
Tell us about your content. Like what, I know you started out doing kind of content for aspiring lawyers and you've evolved from there. We had talked a little bit about how you want to get more into like philosophy and that kind of thing. So I would love to hear kind of where it's been and where it's going.
Yeah, so I started off, like you said, just kind of vlogging about my life, which was my life as a lawyer, which I did most of the time, and also answering questions from people about how to become a lawyer, what being a lawyer is like, how things like elitism and prestige play into the law industry, because they do play a large part. But I think for a lot of people, that's an opaque part of the industry that you don't know about until you're there. And it's helpful to just see the invisible ropes ahead of time. So I made a lot of content around that. And then after a while, actually felt a little, not like disgusted, but was like started wondering, like, what am I putting out in the world? Like, what do I want to motivate people to do? Like, I really liked helping people navigate the ins and outs of things like the prestige elements in law and like the financial aspects of law, because I think a lot of people, myself included, thought that once you become a lawyer, you're like automatically rich. And that's just not really the case. So kind of educating people on the realities of something, and that became more what I was interested in doing. My parents told me that life was easy. It would be easy if I just did XYZ. If I just went to a good college, if I just got a good job, then my life would be easy and I would have it figured out. And it's funny because I'm 31 now, and I'm still like, wow, life is hard. Life is harder than anyone told me about. And I can't even imagine like what other people feel about the difficulties of being alive. So I'm now making content a bit more about like with that in mind. So like, yeah, demystifying what it's like to be a lawyer. Is it for you? Maybe, maybe not, but like we should be able to talk about it a little bit more.
Tell me about your family. Tell me about your kind of childhood experience here.
My family's from China. I was born in China and I moved to the US when I was like 4, and I think had a pretty typical immigrant Chinese experience where my parents were like really, really valued education, and they kind of came to America to be in this like land of opportunity, right? Like they really did see America as like a place where they could have different opportunities than they had back in China. So my mom was kind of like a prototypical tiger mom in that way. So it just had a lot of cultural pains really as I entered my like adolescence with them in terms of they had one idea of how I should live my life, and I had a different idea of what I wanted to have in my life. So there was this like constant tension and struggle. But at the end of the day, like I think they were really always, they wanted me to succeed and have stability in a way that they didn't have as much in China. So that underpins, I think, a lot of my first part of life.
Certainly like the children of immigrants or people of color from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, like their parents wanted them to go to college because they thought it was going to be a step up in society.
Yep.
Right. But like they didn't have the money to pay for it. Maybe some of them were able to benefit from scholarships and that kind of thing. But otherwise, they were taking student loans. Now they're in debt. Have they really moved up in society? I mean, maybe.
Not to the degree that like I think when your parents tell you, hey, go to college, it'll change your life. not to that same degree. And then you're sitting there and you're like, what the hell? What were the actual rules of the system? I don't know, because clearly I was told to do one thing and now I'm here somewhere else.
Right. And you, I mean, we grew up in the same town. I think maybe you were in San Ramon, so one town over. These are primarily white towns, right? So what was that experience like for you? Obviously, for me and Ash, like growing up Indian, The Simpsons basically ruined our childhood. I'm curious, kind of, were there similar stereotypes, cultural appropriations and characters, et cetera, that kind of defined the tone of your youth?
Yeah. I mean, I do think that I was in for a huge culture shock when I did move to the US. I did like a summer camp in California when I first got here. And there were these like two girls who actually they always asked me to say thank you, and I would, and they would like laugh. And I was like, oh, like we're all laughing together. But they actually made me say that because I couldn't say like the sound, the like TH sound yet. So it came out like thank you, thank you. And I think a lot of the early media portrayals, right, of Chinese Americans, of Chinese people, had to do with like that accent that I think we all are really familiar with. So having to, I think later on coming to terms with the fact that I just didn't see a lot of portrayals in media. And whenever I thought of like who I was in my head or who I wanted to be, it was always this like white girl. And it was like a very jarring experience to be like, oh, I think who I want to be in my head is different from who I actually can be at all. It's just always a little bit surreal to see that your own experience is so different from others and have that like proximity, but not closeness, if that makes sense.
I could relate to that. I feel like growing up, everyone I aspired to be was a white guy.
Yeah.
I think it was like the first time that I was like, oh, like Indians can be cool. I could be a cool Indian guy, was like Harold and Kumar, right? Like Kal Penn or Gulpan Modi is his real name. Like his performance was the most relatable Indian character, person, celebrity, whatever it is that like I had ever seen.
It's really jarring to realize that like these things that we see on our screens impact us so much, because I think growing up I was like, who cares? Like I'm not impacted by all of that. But the first time you like see something and you resonate with it, you're like, oh wow, like this is a different reality.
I've been thinking about this a lot. My brother, he's a professor at UCLA, and he still pronounces his last name Gandhi, right? Which is the westernized pronunciation. It's Gandhi. So the D is duh in this language. But the Indian pronunciation is Gandhi, right? And it's like aspirate, Gandhi. But there's no way to convey those noises, those sounds in our alphabet. And so like even my name, my full name is Avinash. It's Avinash, not Avinash, and not Avi. But the only way to spell that out would be like UHVI. And even then, like, does that fully capture the sound? Not really. It's just something I've been thinking about a lot. It's like, it's frustrating that, like I keep seeing on LinkedIn, people posting like sales tactics. And one of them is always like, oh, people's name is the most beautiful sound to them. Well, not really. Like when people say Avi, I'm like, don't say my name.
Yeah.
And like but I also don't like the sound of Avinash. That sounds like foreign because I grew up in America. So now I'm like disconnected from my own name.
No, I feel that. So my actual Chinese name is Xie. And I, that was my legal name for a really long time. And then in college, I actually did go through the whole process of a name change to, formally Cecilia, short name Cece, but really did do the legal changing of my name to something that was like Western and was, I think at that time, I just thought was like a necessary thing to do in order to advance in the world. And like we'd all seen those studies, right, about resumes and how if you just change the name, you get a different response. And right now I feel like a little more ashamed of it. But back then, and I think, especially growing up, going to college, trying to just achieve, I try to do it so much on the existing world's terms, right? It's like, oh, it's just what I have to do. And not only now as our world, I think, gets a little bit better about recognizing all of these issues that we're talking about, am I able to stop and think, oh, like, is this actually what I want to be like playing into? Is this the structure I want to uphold?
Yeah, that's such a hard stand to take though, right? Like I've had similar experiences where like, if I put Avinash on the resume, Avinash, say I can't even pronounce my own name, on the resume versus Avi, like you get different responses. And it's still like I don't know if anyone has noticed, but like over the last couple of months, I keep changing my LinkedIn profile name because I'm like, do I want it to be Avi? Do I want it to be Avinash? Do I want it to be Avinash with Avi in quotes? Do I want it to be Avi with Avinash in quotes? And it's just like, I don't know, because like, yeah, like I want to do the right thing and I want to take a stand for like my culture and for other people of color and other people from other cultures. But like, I also want to get clients. And like, if I'm applying for jobs, I want to get the job. And like, Ash told me that when he was applying as Avi Gandhi, like out of Harvard for jobs, like someone actually told him they weren't sure until they spoke to him on the phone if he'd speak English well,
Oh.
Yeah. And so like, these things happen. What's the line between doing the right thing, like from the perspective of trying to push society forward? Like, can you alone push society forward? Can I alone push society forward? Can the two of us push society forward? Or like, should we just try to get the job, Yeah.
I think that's always the hard thing about like being a person of color, right? Is from a young age, I think you're aware of like the multiplicity of identities that you embody. And, you are slightly different with your parents than you are with your classmates, than you are like with my Chinese friends, you with like your Indian friends. It's like just different. And being aware that we all had to like take on these roles at points, at least we're intentional sometimes about what hat we're putting on. And I think that's at least something, is like being intentional about what role you put on. Like, yes, do I feel some guilt sometimes about playing into the system? Yeah, but it also means that when I decide to do it, I'm making that choice rather than just unintentionally doing it. And when I get the chance to not play into the system, I will do that as well. And I think that's kind of the beauty of growing up different.
Let's jump into your career as a creator. So
all 7 months of it.
Well, look, you've built an audience, a large audience. You are now signed with a book agent and shopping a book around, which I know we talked a couple of months ago, and that was like kind of your like big dream as the next step. So you're making it happen, which is exciting. You made a big move out from, ostensibly a clear-cut path to riches and success in big law into this murky and uncertain world of creatordom. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So I get this question sometimes about like, oh, how do you decide which route to take, right? Versus when it comes to a stable job versus like something more risky, like a creator venture. And I still am really like risk averse at heart. Like I became a lawyer, like that is a part of who I am. So I didn't really start thinking seriously about whether I wanted to be a creator until much more recently. So maybe like a year and a half after I started posting content, I started making TikToks during the pandemic, as I think like a lot of people did when we were all stuck at home. And I was just honestly like kind of depressed because I was just home all the time, and I'm a pretty extroverted person. All my creative endeavors, I did dance with an outside dance company. They shut down, and I was like, you know what, my birthday was coming up, and I was like, my birthday, I just want to do something a little bit different than what I'd been doing every day, which was just like going to my desk at home and then going to my couch. So that's when I was like, all right, I'll just post a TikTok. Like, who cares? And it went a little viral, and that's when I realized that, oh, maybe there was an audience for things that I wanted to make and create. And I started getting a lot of questions about my life, about what being a lawyer was like, and I started like answering those more and more. And about like, a year and a half after this, I started making creator friends and had really people I looked up to who had also recently made the jump to full-time creator. So I talked to them about their decision. One of them, Joanne of the Korean Vegan, she was like a partner at a law firm. Like she was honestly like my idol in my head because she had all of the hallmarks of something that I thought like I should want to, right? Partner at a law firm, like awesome creator career. So she ended up taking a step back from partnership, and we had a long conversation about it and like why and like what I should expect if I wanted to go down the partnership route. And I think somewhere along the way, I was like, oh man, like, is this what I want to commit to? And luckily she had a book coming out. It came out last year, a cookbook. And she was like, oh, well, you want to write, like you've mentioned that a few times, why don't I introduce you to my lit agent? And that kind of was the beginning of the end. When I talked to the lit agent and he was interested in what I had to say and thought that like really believed in me in a capacity that no one had believed in me before, right? Like I think my parents were always like, you're good at school. I think you'd be a great lawyer, doctor, like banker. Like they believed in me in those ways, but I had never had someone established in the industry like believe in me in a creative endeavor. And he was just like, no, I like you. Like, I think we should try to make this work. But in trying to write this book proposal, I could not find the time with my law firm job. Like I would sit down and be like, oh, time to do it. But then an email would come up. So it got to the point where I was like, if I want to make this happen, if I want to try this creative endeavor at all, I kind of have to like jump in, like dive in. I can't just like keep one foot out the door and one foot in on the other side. And that kind of put me in a different position where I started thinking more about like then how to make the exit, planning a little in terms of like researching the industry, researching how people make a living in this industry, talking to influencer managers to try and figure out like what they do, what the landscape was like. And after a few months of that, that was when I was finally like, okay, I feel like it will be a risk, but it will be a calculated risk. And, you know, during my discussion with Joanne too, she also was like, yeah, I think it's a risk, sure, but it's a calculated risk. And at this point, right, I think with how uncertain being a creator is, a calculated risk is all you can take. It's the best you can hope for.
It's a good point. And also, especially in the current economic environment, there's risk wherever you are. You could be at $1 billion. I mean, you know, Intel is laying thousands of people off. At this point, there's no such thing as stability, right? So why not pursue your dream?
When push comes to shove, like they will lay you off. They don't really owe you anything. And I think we're all coming to terms that this is happening on many careers that we otherwise like wouldn't conceive of.
The idea of stability is kind of a farce.
Yeah, it's a comforting illusion though, you know, it's like we want to believe in it because we want to feel safe. Like it makes sense.
Well, and I feel like our parents, you know, at least my parents coming from immigrant family, I'm assuming yours too. Like my parents' friends were all like in the early .com boom and made lots of money. But my parents were like, they were like stability. So like they worked for the government. And even then, like, in 2008, my dad got laid off. He worked for the local government and he just like happened to be just recent enough, like, which was like 6-7 years at the county of San Mateo that like, that was it. It's like, there really is no such thing. So under those circumstances, like why not bet on yourself, right?
It's either you make the decision to do it yourself or someone else makes it for you, right? And at least when you make it yourself, you might be able to control the circumstances a little around which you do it.
As someone with a, you know, Chinese background, as, you know, an immigrant and child of immigrants, like becoming a creator, was that difficult for you within your family, within your community? Like, tell me about that.
Yeah, weirdly enough, my parents were way more supportive of it than I would have thought. I mean, my mom was like a major Tiger mom back in the era, but she herself has gone through some career changes since. And I think going through this experience of where you thought something was like forever and then realizing that it's not, it does change your perspective in some way. So when I told her that I was planning on leaving my job, she was really supportive and was just like, you know, you tried the thing and we work so much that we shouldn't do something that we're not like super passionate about. Like, I support you in this fully. My dad was a bit more like, I thought you'd have a house first, but I guess not. So you can always move back home. So in like their way, they were, I think, like weirdly supportive.
That's really interesting that your mom had that career pivot and like that probably that experience for her probably created some empathy that she might not have had she maintained the stability of like, you know, her researcher role that she probably got as an immigrant and thought of as stable from like this fear-based immigrant thinking perspective.
Yeah, 100%. I think oftentimes like we think of our parents in our community as static, right? Like in our minds, they are the same community that we grew up with when we were like, you know, 8 to 18, but they're changing too. Like, I think they're having experiences too. They're also growing up in America or like growing up in different places. And I think giving them that empathy as well, I think you'd be surprised. I was really surprised by how well received my career pivot was. And I think it is like due to to my parents also having grown up a lot but in my head, like they're still what they're like when I was like 14 and trying to hang out with boys.
Yeah, that's funny. And you're kind of blowing my mind because now I'm like thinking about like how supportive my dad has been over the last like several years of like my, I left a job at WME to like try to start a VR company. And then like after Patreon, now I'm doing this consulting thing. And like, he's been so supportive. And I'm like, oh yeah, because he got laid off. He did a startup thing for a while. Like now he's working for a stable job again, but like he can empathize.
Yeah. Did high school Avi like ever conceive of the possibility?
No, not ever. Not ever. I mean, yeah, it's pretty wild. Any negative experiences, like any, because of your background being a creator?
I think the hardest negative experience currently is dealing with an industry that I think is still fairly white and dominated by just a lot of stereotypical actions and thinking that you would think of when you do have like an industry whose decision makers are all thinking from one perspective rather than a more like diverse perspective. So I think the most negative things have been just when I was maybe shopping around for a manager, I got a lot of feedback that was like, we love what you're doing. Let's stay in touch. It was a lot of like, we want you to prove yourself before like we will take a chance on you. And having creator friends who are like really all races and ethnicities and genders, it does seem like that more often happens to creators of color. Whereas, if you are a hot white girl, you are probably being scouted from the moment you like have 5,000 followers. Like someone will reach out to you and be like, hey, we like you. We want to. And I've known this to happen. Like creators do talk to each other, and we do hear about the people who get reached out to at 5,000 followers. And like a manager or agent is like, we see you're a star and we're going to help you. And that's not something that really happens as often when you're a creator of color. Like even the good meetings I had, I might come back to, and then they're like, you know what, I think you're still too small, or like you have to grow your Instagram. There's just like always some obstacle that you have to overcome.
Are the managers that are kind of doing this, or like signing, white creators when they're smaller and putting a higher bar for creators of color, are those primarily white managers, or are you also observing it from managers of color?
I think they're predominantly white managers. I actually didn't talk to many like managers of color, maybe like 2 of them, and they were honestly the most encouraging out of all of them. But it's still, I think even at like the management like agent level, it's still like really, really white. I think this is true of like a lot of marketing advertising roles.
Well, and it's certainly true of like the talent management and talent representation community. Are there any ways that your background has kind of worked in your favor?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a part of like a AAPI group chat on Instagram, and it's helpful to just know that there are other people who like have your back and like would be willing to talk to you about certain things and go to bat for you when it's really necessary, because we realize like how hard it is sometimes to really break out and like have the opportunity even to reach the broader audience. So I think Joanne's really been an amazing advocate for me, and that she like made herself available, like referred me to her agent. Like that is an awesome thing. And I know for her, like D&I is like a huge thing. I mean, her content is all about like Korean vegan food, right? So she just like has her pulse on this like cultural aspect and like this need to raise the profiles of diverse voices. So I think being able to, that like is a huge help. Is it's a smaller group, sure, but because it's a smaller group, I think we are all way more willing to like help each other out and like lift each other up rather than try to tear each other down in any way, because we've realized like we need to stick together.
And what kind of ways are y'all lifting each other up?
I think a lot of it sometimes is, telling about like invites or like industry events, meeting up. Honestly, emotional support is one of the most helpful things as being a creator. It's a mentally hard life. Like I wouldn't say it's like harder than any other job, because it really isn't, but it is a mentally difficult life, and being able to talk to others about it in a way is really invaluable. Also learning things like from talking to, she is like a woman of color manager. She actually told me that for months, like whether it's like a heritage month, right? Like AAPI Heritage Month, when you get brand outreach for content during those months, you should actually like charge higher. And I was like, wow, this wasn't even something I knew. Like, thank you for the information. So like being able to tell you how to like leverage yourself differently, that especially because you just don't get access to this information, right? It's a lot of like information asymmetry, and being able to like share the information with each other is, I think, just like really, really important, as well as like help each other through the emotional times of like creating another day.
That's really interesting. It's like if you had a manager, like if you were able to get through the gatekeepers into like the gate kept system, you might have that information. I also wonder, like, would a white manager know that? Like,
Yeah.
if a white manager primarily works with white creators, like, are
Right.
they going to know to ask for more during like AAPI month or Black History Month or whatever it might be?
Right, exactly. When you have like, I don't know, a POC manager, like I think they're kind of attuned to the different buttons and like levers that you can push and pull in a way that if you've built a career never having to notice that, like why would you know if they exist?
Like this conversation and like the two conversations I've had for the podcast otherwise are kind of like blowing my mind, because I've never really talked about this in the context of like the creator economy or entertainment. And like, you know, it's almost like a taboo thing. It's like a little scary, you know, like, and I was in the mothership, right? I was like at
You
WME and I was like the only person of color on the team for a significant period of time. But even then, like, you know, I'm not perfect in that sense either, right? Like I was talking to King Russell, and, you know, he was talking about how he didn't get on the BET red carpet for several years, even though like I was on his team, because I'm not in the Black community. I didn't even think about, you know, should we reach out to BET, right? And so like it's never going to be perfect. You know what I mean? Like the only way it's perfect is like through self-segregation. Like if I worked exclusively with Indian people, all right, well then they might think to all of the Indian brands and media companies or whatever to reach out to, but like they're not going to know the mainstream, if you will, or like other niches, right? Like I'm into anime, but they're not going to think to reach out to Japanese companies or whatever, right? And so like it's almost like diversity, broad diversity, right? Like not just like people like you, but all kinds of people around you is ultimately like what serves the best outcomes for everyone.
I love that there's all these like niches now cropping up, and even in podcasting, right? There's like, so there's podcasts that are so niche, and I'm like, I love this. I love that now we're in a world where we can really, I guess, like fly our freak flag a little bit more when it comes to what we're thinking about.
You're obviously a creator on the internet. You're a woman. You're a person of color. So I imagine that you experience toxicity of the internet, you know, hate, negativity, whatever it might be. Like, have you felt a lot of that or some of that? How have you kind of dealt with it? And has it changed over time at all?
Yeah, I mean, the first time you go viral, right, is an exciting and terrible time. I always say, like, it's exciting because you're like, oh, wow, something I made is gaining traction. You get this, like, feeling of excitement because you think what you put out there is resonating with the world in some way. And at the end of the day, like, I think being a creator is wanting to put something out in the world that resonates with other people, right? So that's the exciting part. But I would sit there and, like, read comment sections, and it would always be something about, you know, my race, my gender. I think you kind of have to come face to face with just how toxic the internet can be. And in the beginning, I did go through many months of trying to figure out how to orient myself with respect to toxicity, because I grew up kind of as a people pleaser, surprise, surprise. And like seeing how many people hated me just based upon like what I looked like, or because they didn't like something I said, so they thought they would attack something about my heritage. That was really jarring. It's also kind of alienating on a deeper level, and I think that's the hardest part, is like you feel alone again. And the whole point of creating is to not feel alone, I think, or at least for me. But over time, I think, you know, developing this support network of other creators, both like POC and like, you know, white, they really help in keeping your why in mind, even though there is a lot of toxicity.
Well, it sounds like the toxicity that you've experienced as a woman, as a person of color, has a little bit sort of, it's almost like a double-edged sword against like the benefits and like kind of feeling closer to people and being able to share your experiences.
Yeah, it's hard because you also want to be close to your supporters, right? Like the people
Right.
who you do help feel less alone, and who do like support you. So by putting in that like layer, you're also kind of distancing yourself from them.
Well, what's next for you? Tell us about it.
Yeah, so I am currently shopping my book proposal around to publishers, which is very exciting.
What's it called? Do you have a name for it yet?
Yeah, so the tentative title, I don't know, maybe the publisher will ask me to change it, but it's called Big Bad Law, and it will kind of be a recounting of some of the things that we had talked about on, in this podcast, which is how the structures of big law, how like the practices really contribute to a system that is not doing what it's supposed to do, right? Like what we think it's supposed to do. I think one of the most jarring things about entering the law firm environment is I assume that all the structures, all the policies would make sense. But then I saw like many things that like didn't make sense, many things that honestly like perpetuate pushing out of like minorities among like partnership. A lot of practices that contribute to staying quiet when sexual harassment happens. And I was like, man, this is like the law. Like I thought this was, law and order, like the reverence I had for the law, and it just was not playing out internally in a way. And I was like, this is kind of a commentary on just how our systems and structures and policies are failing us in a way. Oh yeah. And then I started a podcast like 4 weeks ago, and it's been a process, but it's called Currently Workshopping. And
it's hard, right? Everyone's like, oh, making a podcast, it's easy. You're just talking to a mic. I'm like, this is like one of the hardest things I've ever done. I'm terrible at this, but like, it's practice.
You have to view it as practice. You have to view it as like being terrible publicly over and over again until one day you're not as terrible.
Yeah, I've never really shied away from making a fool of myself in public, but like I'm about to do it on LinkedIn and YouTube and TikTok and Instagram and Apple, and it's gonna be something. So
right. That's the hardest thing to get over, I think, especially if you come from like kind of this like overachieving background with like tiger parents, is like this idea that you will do things imperfectly and you will do them imperfectly publicly. Like that's
I didn't even think about that. Yeah. It is what it is. You just got to do it. Yeah. Yeah. It's okay to get a B. It's okay to get a C, to be honest. Like
totally consistent C's still get degrees, right? So
yeah.
But yes, this podcast is kind of about what we've been talking about, kind of just analysis into modern issues of work, like culture and being alive.
That's awesome. So currently workshopping. I assume everywhere you get your podcasts.
Everywhere you get your podcasts, you're right.
We love it. We love it. All right, let's talk about some advice that you have for other creators. The purpose of this podcast is to inspire and enable a new generation of creators of color. I know you've started relatively recently, but it's been a crash course, I think. So if you were to start again today, based on your experiences so far, what advice would you give yourself?
It's to really experiment in the beginning, because it's sometimes hard to like know what you want to put out there that also resonates with an audience, right? I think people say sometimes like, oh, don't think about the audience, but that's I don't know. I'm kind of the mind that, yeah, people are out there and like you should consider them. So kind of try to figure out like what you want to say that also resonates with a lot of other people. Like being a creator isn't a vanity project, right? It's not just all about you. Like you have to think about what value you're giving to other people as well. And then with that, kind of keep that as your North Star, because I think oftentimes, especially in the age of like virality and TikTok, I did get led astray sometimes. And I was like, oh, well, like, it seems like the algorithm wants me to give this content, so I'll give this content. And it doesn't feel good at the end of the day, even if it does do well and you gain a lot of followers who like expect something that you don't want to do or be from you at the end of the day. But I think in the beginning, it's so easy to like want to go viral. Like I think in the beginning, like that's all your goal is. And for a lot of people, that is all their goal is. But kind of like to take a step back and like ask yourself like the meta question of like, why are you even creating? What is it like you want to do? What is it that like compels you to create whatever you're creating?
And do you have any advice for other people of color considering becoming creators as to how to use their background, skin color, cultural background, etc., as a strength in their pursuit?
I think it's really to just not hide who you are, right? In so much of life, we've talked about this, we try to minimize ourselves a little to fit in with like what we think the system wants from us, right? Whether it's like resume names or just not talking about some like cultural thing that you did this past weekend when people go around asking about like, oh, what'd you do this past weekend? And I think you can like use those as your strengths and talk about it a little bit more. I feel like the videos that I've done that have helped me connect the most with my audience is talking about things like how my parents treated money growing up and how that like impacted me and all these things that I think if especially at Yale, I like really try to hide like at Yale because it was such a privileged environment. I was like, I cannot let anyone know that I have had a different experience. It was like almost scary, but I really do think that it's like, if you're feeling it, probably someone else out there in the world is feeling it too. And if you can share and help that person feel a little less weird about what they're doing, then that is awesome. And you would probably be surprised at how many more people have felt how you felt when it comes to your particular relationship with your background, your culture, your heritage, your parents, than you would think. And that's really like the beauty of it, because it's like, it's the internet. It's creating, like, you don't have to do what everyone else is doing. And honestly, you're probably better off not doing it. Like, you didn't go the traditional Hollywood, like, agent manager route. So you're not beholden to those same rules. Like, let that be freedom rather than a restriction.
It's interesting, like, just having these conversations, to your point of like other people having similar experiences, like every single one of these conversations, the person I'm talking to talks about some experience that I can relate to. It's interesting to be able to like share those stories and to see that like, hey, it's not just me, like a lot of people have had these experiences. This was a question that we got on LinkedIn when I solicited questions from my audience, and I love it. For our white allies that are listening to this, like, do you have any advice for them on how, whether they're creators or executives, they can support creators of color?
So I think for other creators, it's really to form relationships with like creators of color and share information, right? Like, I think I'm really friendly with a white creator, and we just get dinner all the time and talk about like her experiences in the industry, and I share my experiences in the industry. And I think that like information sharing is really powerful because you don't know what's happening until someone else tells you about it. And for executives, I've actually thought about this question a lot. And I think a lot of it comes down to really directing the people who interface with creators of color to not try and like get the winning contract terms or like get the lowest rate. It's like you need to recognize that there might be an existing information asymmetry and kind of like help not perpetuate the inequities that already exist, right? Sometimes it's really heartening when you do talk to a brand and they're like, okay, like, I think this makes sense. And it's like a higher number than you ever think. Or they send contract terms, and this is where the legal training comes in. I read and I'm like, okay, no, these actually like are good. They're not like trying to screw me. And I have seen contract terms that like are really, really unfavorable to other creators. And I'm like, wow, if I know this only because I'm a lawyer, like how can other creators, especially creators without access, without managers, without agents, like how do they really navigate all of this? There's more like minorities and like people of color every day in America. And I think with that will come increased purchasing power, increased like cultural influence. And I think like, white executives, they just need to think about all of this as like long-term research, right? Like, what is the overall goal? In the future, just being aware that there will be a lot more creators of color, like consumers of color. So this is a long-term relationship, and like kind of helping develop that beforehand. Rather than just like thinking about what we can do like for the next campaign only.
I think in the last census, the 2020 census, there were more people than ever who identified as multiracial.
Yep.
And like, that's only going to go up. So I think it's a really important point, is that it's not just like, we're not talking about charity here,
Yeah. There's a good business sense to it too.
Yeah. Any other advice you have for creators? Anything I should have asked you but didn't?
Yeah, I guess I would say that being before like entering the creator life, I think the best thing one can do is really, really be realistic about what the financial impacts are going to be, and like do your research on the realities, because I think, this is true in law too, where a lot of people jump in and they're like, I'm going to make millions immediately because they saw like XYZ do the same. And I think getting a good lay of the land really helps there, and helps you not either like save up too little and then you kind of have to like scramble a bit more, but like be able to view this as like a long-term game and like a game of longevity.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point. I think a lot of creators have gone into just making stuff because they like making stuff, and then suddenly they have an audience, or they build an audience, but they don't really have a vision for how to like leverage that audience. I think that's starting to change, I think, as more creators are thinking about it as a business. But there's always going to be this kind of spectrum of like artist to entrepreneur. And I think most creators are going to fall somewhere in the middle. Sounds like you're saying, do your research, do your homework, and spend some time thinking about the other side of that equation.
Yeah. Like kind of balance the entrepreneur, like artist balance, because you will need some of both. And if you have like 0% knowledge in the entrepreneur angle, then it could still work out, but it's going to be a lot tougher, and you're going to be like a lot more emotionally up and down.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on Creators of Color. So it was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it, and like also like making me think about a lot of things. Hopefully the folks listening will be able to empathize, will have experience that they can relate to, and will have learned something from it. So Cece, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This has been quite a cathartic discussion.
Yes. Well, we'll have to do it again sometime. Thanks for listening to Creators of Color. That was an amazing conversation with Cece Xie. The conversations that we've had over the last few weeks, it's not really something we've ever talked about. It was kind of just like this implicit, like, hey, I'm an agent of color, and I want to work with you. And they, as Kingsley mentioned, like there was some level of implicit, unspoken comfort there, and likewise throughout my other roles. So now being able to have these conversations about people's experiences, I'm realizing like I'm not the only person who has felt the way that I felt. I found it very gratifying. I appreciate you for listening to these and for hopefully finding them gratifying as well. And I'm looking forward to doing more of them. Creators of Color is created, hosted, and produced by myself, Avi Gandhi, executive produced by Trenton Barboza, edited by Eric Abel. The theme song is written and performed by Justine Lightling. If you like the podcast and want to support us, please leave a comment, leave a review, subscribe, follow, like, whatever it is for whatever platform you're on. We are on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, and we distribute shorts to all the shorts platforms. And so you can find us wherever you're trying to find us. And please share it with your friends, because the more people that listen, that helps us sustain and continue the show. So thanks again for listening, and looking forward to the next one.